Lawyers have read it. What's the dirtier way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court proceedings? Story 1. A few years back, a colleague of mine prosecuted a case involving a 30-year-old man who had made what we'll generously call a catastrophic lapse in judgment. His girlfriend's 14-year-old sister ended up pregnant. Authorities didn't rush. They simply waited until the baby was born, ran a paternity test, and, surprise, it came back exactly how you'd expect. The defendant, despite everything, thought probation sounded like a fair outcome. The prosecutor disagreed. So he pled guilty but chose to let a jury decide his sentence, a strategy that, when successful, usually requires the jury to feel at least some sympathy. The trial started. The evidence was straightforward. The victim testified, the paternity test was submitted, and the narrative was clear. Things were playing out exactly as expected. Then the defendant took the stand. And, apparently deciding that things hadn't gone badly enough, he gave the jury a brand new version of events. According to him, the situation hadn't been inappropriate but consensual. No. He claimed it had been non-consensual, entirely forced, and described himself as the aggressor. No one was more surprised than his own attorney, who looked like he aged 5 years in 10 seconds. The jury took 15 minutes. They returned with a 17-year sentence, just shy of the 20-year max. Later, when asked why 17, one of the jurors said they picked it to help the defendant remember the age of consent in Texas. So, in the end, he didn't just lose his case. He gave himself a worse version, and the jury gave him a daily reminder. Story 2. I was representing a client in a post-divorce hearing about alimony. His ex-wife had recently filed to increase the amount, claiming their children still needed support. Now, here's the key point. In our system, once children reach the age of majority, support isn't required if they're not in school and have started working. The tricky part, we had a strong suspicion the kids were working, but we couldn't get any documentation to prove it. No pay stubs, no contracts, nothing public, just whispers and secondhand info. Still, we moved forward, hoping we might get something useful during the hearing itself, maybe a slip-up under questioning. At that point, it was really the only strategy we had left. The day of the trial arrives. Opposing party shows up with her attorney, but the children don't come. The judge looks up from the file and asks, "Madam, can you tell us why your children couldn't be here today?" Without missing a beat, she replies, "They couldn't get permission at work." The room froze. The judge just stared at her. I glanced at my client. No one said a word. A few long seconds passed before the judge slowly looked down at the file again and said, "Well, that was fast." We didn't need to ask another question. The case ended right there. Story 3. I was defending a company in a civil suit. Plaintiff was a former employee, and one of her witnesses was a coworker who came in ready to go to war. She testified forcefully, really committed, spoke in glowing terms about the plaintiff and harshly against the company. So I started with the obvious, asked her about bias. "Are you close with the plaintiff?" "No," she said, "just work friends, friendly at the office, that's all." I pinned her down, clarified again and again, no family ties, no real social connection outside work? "Correct," she said, "strictly professional." Great, I left it there. Later, I cross-examined the plaintiff herself. We got to the topic of her witnesses. And now, she had a choice to make. Because that work friend, they weren't just close. They were sisters-in-law. Not a coincidence, not a guess. I'd done my research. No shared last name, nothing obvious on paper, but the connection was real. So I asked directly, "Isn't it true that your witness is actually related to you by marriage?" Silence. Then she admitted it. Just like that, her own testimony torched the credibility of her star witness. Not because I had to twist the facts, but because they'd insisted on denying a minor bias instead of just owning it from the start. It happens more than you'd think. People think admitting a small connection looks suspicious, but pretending not to know your own family looks worse every single time. Story 4. I'm keeping this vague for obvious reasons, but I once represented a client who was facing a very serious charge, something that, if convicted, would have meant prison time, a permanent record, and a complete end to his life as he knew it. The key part of his defense was an alibi. At the time of the alleged incident, he was at work, and not just an employee there, but the boss. Even better, he had someone who could back that up, an employee. I called the guy, and he confirmed it. Yeah, he was definitely here the whole time. Great, I plan to use him. But in cases like this, especially with something as critical as an alibi, you don't take anything for granted. Just before I filed the formal notice, the one that alerts the prosecution and gives them a chance to investigate the alibi, I decided to call the employee one more time, just to be thorough. That's when everything changed. Because in the time between our first call and now, my client had fired him. And this time, the employee was blunt. Oh, he was definitely there, no doubt, but I'm not saying that in court. Screw that guy, he's going down. Just like that, a solid alibi turned into a grenade waiting to go off under my case. If I hadn't made that second call, I would have walked into trial relying on testimony from someone who had every intention of turning on my client, someone who would have told the court the exact opposite of what he told me privately. I never filed the alibi notice, never called him as a witness, and we still won. But if I hadn't double-checked, if that one call hadn't happened, it would have been over, completely. That case taught me something I'll never forget. Don't just confirm your witness, confirm who they are when things get personal. Story 5. One of the few family law cases I handled as a young attorney still stands out to me, because it was the rare moment where everything turned not on strategy, but on the other side's total lack of self-awareness. A young woman wanted to end her marriage. Her husband had recently been arrested on serious charges and was, by her words, fully committed to the thug life. She was trying to build a better future for herself and their child. He wasn't happy about the divorce. He hired one of the biggest names in the area, a well-known, very experienced attorney. We were in a rural, conservative jurisdiction, and the temporary orders reflected that. No overnight guests of the opposite sex allowed while the case was pending. The young woman, my client, had started seeing someone new. Her ex didn't take it well. So his attorney filed for an emergency hearing, accusing her of violating the court order and demanding full custody. She wanted my client to not only lose custody, but also be restricted to supervised visits and ordered to pay child support and legal fees. I had just started practicing law. Opposing counsel made sure to remind me of that. She tried to strong-arm a deal, and when I didn't fold, she said, "Fine, we'll see you in court." We showed up. They called the young man to the stand. He confirmed that my client had her boyfriend over on several nights, and the judge, who was known for being very conservative, didn't love hearing that. Then it was my turn. I asked him if he had a job. He said no. "What do you do for income?" "Just some things here and there." I nodded. "Must be hard affording your attorney. Do you, for example, ever supplement your income illegally?" He froze. "What? Have you ever sold anything illegal to make ends meet?" He denied it. So I handed the judge a certified copy of his recent guilty plea, same charges my client had mentioned. Opposing counsel hadn't seen it. She clearly hadn't been told. The judge's expression changed immediately. Then I leaned over to my client and whispered, "If the judge ordered a drug test right now, would you pass?" She nodded, completely clean. So I asked him, "When's the last time you used anything illegal?" His lawyer objected. The judge overruled. He said it had been years. I asked if he'd pass a test. He said yes. Opposing counsel, trying to play it even, asked the same of my client. We agreed. The judge ordered both of them tested. My client was clean. He wasn't. That was it. The judge denied his request, rewrote the temporary orders, and this time placed him on supervised visitation. He was also ordered to start paying support and maintain employment. After the hearing, I got a voicemail. It was from opposing counsel. and all she said was, "Congratulations. You handed me my own case. I haven't had that happen in a long time." Sometimes the best strategy is letting the facts speak first. Story 6. I took my ex to court after I found out she'd used my social security number to open a cable account without telling me. I only found out when the bills stopped getting paid and the collections notices started showing up with my name on them. So I filed a claim. At the hearing, we both showed up. I brought the contract from the cable company, the one with my social security number, and her name clearly written on the signature line. No attempt to forge anything, no fake initials, just her full name in her own handwriting under my personal info. In court, she tried to deny all of it, said she had no idea how it happened, no clue who could have done that. The judge flipped through the paperwork, looked at her, then back at the documents, and just said, "So you're saying someone stole your ex's personal information and accidentally used your name?" It went downhill for her from there. The judge didn't hold back. Firm tone, clear words made it very obvious that the court wasn't buying a single part of her story. Watching someone try to lie their way out of something that obvious was painful, but also kinda satisfying. She didn't just lose the case, she lost it by being exactly the person who got us there in the first place. Story 7. Someone I know, a defense attorney working a pro bono case, had what should have been a rare courtroom win. Her client had been charged with a criminal offense, details confidential, of course. The police and prosecution had strong suspicions, a compelling timeline, maybe even motive. But what they didn't have was evidence. Nothing hard, just circumstantial dots loosely connected. She gave her client the usual instruction. Say nothing, let me do the talking. Absolutely nothing. She'd seen it before, clients trying to explain themselves into a corner. Not this time. Trial proceeds. She lays out the defense. With no direct evidence, she builds a clean case, methodical, calm, sharp. When she finishes her plea, even she feels it. The rare pro bono case that might actually stick the landing. The judge listens, nods, and thanks her for her argument. Then he turns to the defendant and says, "Do you have anything you'd like to add?" She glances sideways at her client. He glances at her, then at the judge, eyes welling up, and says, "I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again." There's a pause. You could hear a pin drop. Then, quietly, the sound of legal pads, pens, and files hitting the defense table. She had apparently thrown everything at him. He had built himself a confession. Story 8. This isn't my story, but one from a former boss. The kind of attorney who didn't just practice law, but enjoyed occasionally dragging the truth out by the ankles. Back when they were still doing general practice, they took on a brutal case. A drunk driving incident where an entire family's world collapsed. Mother and 2 kids gone. Father left behind. The defendant? A college guy. Bright future, big dreams, a tragic oopsie behind the wheel with a blood alcohol level that could sterilize a countertop. In court, the kid came in swinging, emotionally at least. Tearful apologies, trembling voice, swearing off alcohol forever. He painted himself as a shattered soul, haunted by what he'd done. And, for a moment, the judge seemed to buy it. Head nods, furrowed brow, the kind of expression judges wear right before saying something like community service and reflection. Then came my boss. They quietly set a stack of printed Facebook posts on the table. Timestamps, photos, statuses, one-liners about surviving another wild night, complete with red solo cups and middle fingers in the background. The posts didn't just cover the months after the accident, they stretched back to the night it happened. There was one photo that really sealed it. A meme the kid shared about beating the hangover like I beat the DUI. Charming. Suddenly, the remorseful young man looked like he'd just remembered mid-trial that courtrooms have Wi-Fi. The judge's face went from gentle to glacial. Shift 1. The courtroom moods swings from pity to fury. Shift 2. The college kid realizes he's no longer starring in a redemption arc. He's been recast in a cautionary tale. Needless to say, the judge was no longer in a forgiving mood. Apologies didn't cut it anymore. The sentence that followed came with enough weight to sober anyone up, permanently. Story 9. Not my story, but my dad's. Back when he worked as the local version of a public defender, and everyone in court knew the regulars by name, hangover, and favorite bench to cry on. There was this one man, let's call him a weekend enthusiast, who had a remarkable talent for turning public spaces into private disasters. Public intoxication? Regular. Lewd behavior? Absolutely. Every Friday, like clockwork, he was either arrested or escorted out of somewhere, pants optional. He became such a staple that even the judges developed a sort of exhausted affection for him. Then, one day, he stepped things up, showed up in court for drunk driving. Same judge, now visibly done with the whole circus. But then, moment of pathos. The man wept. He said he'd finally gotten a job out of town, wanted to change his life, and this was just a final mistake on his way out. The judge, somehow moved, said, "Fine, just don't ever come back to my courtroom again." And for a second, everyone thought this might be the start of his redemption. That lasted exactly one weekend. Monday morning, same courtroom, same man, same judge, drunk driving again. My dad's now representing him, trying not to laugh as the judge stares at the man like he personally invented disappointment. The man, between sniffles, says, "Your Honor, I was leaving town, but my friends threw me a going-away party." That was the moment the judge's soul left his body. So here's the arc. First, he gets mercy on the promise of leaving. Then he ends up right back because his farewell party turned into an encore performance. And jail, it turns out, was the only destination he actually managed to reach. Story 11. I'm currently representing a kind elderly woman who was just trying to live out her days watering her garden and ignoring the modern world. Unfortunately, her neighbor was not as content. He casually mentioned one day that her house, a tidy, modest home, was basically worthless. Termite city, pipes from the Bronze Age, a crumbling foundation probably built by witches. She was understandably alarmed. He offered a solution. He'd take it off her hands. Just to help, of course, out of kindness. The next day, he arrived like a discount notary public with papers in hand. She signed them all. Why? Because she couldn't see them. Literally. She has an eye condition and assumed, perhaps tragically, that someone offering you a pen must also be offering something good. The paperwork? A masterclass in villainy. He was getting the house for 36% of its value. The required repairs included life-threatening horrors such as a leaky bathroom faucet and unmodern tiles. Twist number 1, she thought she'd still be living in the house after the sale. She signed away her home and didn't know she was also signing an eviction notice. But here's where it gets really charming. The buyer is now suing her for the house, trying to financially strangle her into giving up because her legal fees are piling up. She lives on a small pension, reads books by holding them an inch from her face, and waters her tomatoes like they're her retirement plan. Twist number 2, the only reason this didn't go through quietly is because the lawyer meant to close the deal took one look and said, "This is either elder abuse or a cartoon villain origin story." And now here we are. She's fighting for the right to stay in her own home. And I'm fighting the creeping urge to mail someone a box of faucets and a conscience. Story 12. So, picture this. A woman dies 20 years ago, my biological grandmother. She leaves her estate in good faith to her husband, my grandfather, with the classic plan. Use it while you're alive, then pass it on to the kids. Simple, clean, honorable. Then comes Act 2. My grandfather remarries, nothing wild there, but his new wife brings along a daughter, who we'll call the opportunist. This woman's career could best be described as frequent flyer on someone else's dime. She would take her aging parents on vacations, which were really seasonal shopping sprees disguised as skiing trips, 8 times a year, with their money every single time. Years pass, my grandfather dies, and now the estate is split. His widow gets support, and the opportunist gets control of funds to take care of her mother, who now has dementia and needs round-the-clock care. But that's not enough. Somewhere between spa days and inheritance math, she gets a brilliant idea. Why not sue my paralyzed dad and my heart problem sporting uncle for their dead mother's money? So now we're in court. My dad is in a wheelchair. I'm literally rolling him in. My uncle's there too, leaning on a cane like the human embodiment of a bad medical chart. They're both living on fixed disability income. Then in glides my step-aunt, perfectly healthy, oozing privilege, and backed by the small mountain of wealth she already siphoned from both estates. The judge takes one look at my father, at my uncle, at her, and the mood shifts fast. Let's just say the case lasted under an hour. She left with nothing, except perhaps a legal invoice and a new record in courtroom speedruns. Story 13. So there I was, fresh out of law school, still figuring out where the courthouse bathrooms were, and already tossed into the $50 million deep end, bankruptcy court. No experience, no clue. Just a vague directive from a partner who probably wanted plausible deniability. Go try to make a creditor claim on that building. You'll be fine. Spoiler, I was not fine. The judge took one look at our paperwork, blinked once, and basically said, "Cute try, but you're not a creditor. Sit down." Which was fair. Our client had bought some flaky claim against a tenant purely to get a foot in the door, and the court smelled that hustle a mile away. So now, with my tiny role in this real estate opera already finished, I sat back to observe 2 of the biggest bankruptcy sharks in the city tear into each other. One repped the debtor, the guy who owned the building. The other, the secured creditor who had a lien on said building and wanted it sold. They hated each other. I don't mean courtroom drama. I mean full-blown legal blood feud. Personal, generational. If court filings could throw punches, this hearing would have needed a paramedic. And just when it couldn't get spicier, the judge steps out for a moment to handle another matter. A small break. Everyone exhales. Then, plot twist. We come back, and Mr. Secured Creditor calmly stands up and drops the legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb. Your Honor, my client has just purchased controlling interest in the debtor. I've been instructed to terminate opposing counsel and withdraw the motion to sell the building. Boom. He turns to his longtime rival and fires him in open court. Then he pulls the rug out from under the entire proceedings by withdrawing the sale. Just like that. No screaming, no theatrics. Just cold, strategic carnage. The judge, stunned. The courtroom, silent. The lawyers, shocked and probably questioning their career choices. And me, the wide-eyed baby attorney sitting in the back, realizing I had just witnessed a corporate Game of Thrones power move so precise, so brutal, it made every bar prep class feel like nap time at daycare. To this day, nearly 30 years later, I still haven't seen anything like it. And I really, really hope that guy billed for travel time. Story 14. This isn't a courtroom drama from a legal series. This actually happened to my family. My husband's kids came to us after years of chaos and asked us to fight for full custody. They were done, and honestly, so were we. The final straw? My stepdaughter had been harmed in the worst way, and their mom responded by dating, then marrying, a man who was best friends with the one responsible. She never told us, never reported it, never even got her daughter therapy, just moved on like nothing had happened. Fast forward to mediation, she tries to flip the narrative, pulling out a private conversation I had with her and completely twisting it. Problem is, the moment she brought it up, she basically confirmed that it happened, something she denied until then. My husband kept calm, just said, that conversation was about how deeply uncomfortable our daughter is living in the same house as someone directly connected to her assault. The mediator paused, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "You have someone living in your house who is connected to your daughter's trauma. Your relationship with your children is broken." That was the turning point. She broke down crying. She sobbed through the rest of the session, then signed over custody, because deep down she knew that was just the beginning of what we could have brought forward. Hearing her cry, I won't lie, it felt like karma finally clocked in for her shift. I was the one who had to walk that girl into the police station, the one who tried to warn her mother before it ever got this far. And she tried to use that against me? She made her choices. She gambled with her kids' trust, and she lost. Story 15. This guy thought he was starring in a courtroom-themed reality show, except the plot was just him pulling every excuse in the book to avoid facing consequences. Sometimes he showed up, sometimes his lawyer did, sometimes they both just didn't. But they never forgot to send a wildly creative excuse. One week he was off for emergency fertility treatments in Eastern Europe. The next, visiting a mysteriously multiplying collection of dying relatives scattered across 3 continents. My personal favorite? He rushed to the ER on the way to court and handed us a hospital form in a foreign language, which we translated. Yes, he had been admitted. Also, yes, he'd been discharged 4 hours before court started. And just when we thought he couldn't get more obvious, he tried the old fire your lawyer to buy time trick. Then the new lawyer showed up and, surprise, said he hadn't even spoken to the guy and needed a delay. Sometimes they argued in front of the judge about who was more unprepared. We kept telling the court, this man is stalling, plain and simple. We even brought examples of other cases where he played the same game and got off with warnings. But somehow, he kept getting second chances like it was a loyalty program. Until one day, the judge made it crystal clear. I don't care if you're meeting with the Pope, you will be in court on this date. And that was the day he vanished again. No call, no email, no lawyer, just silence. So the court finally snapped. His entire defense was tossed out, and the judge handed us a full default judgment. But he wasn't done. He filed a motion claiming the judgment was unfair because, in his words, he didn't get a chance to present his side. After ghosting court more times than a bad Tinder date. Turns out, when you play games with the system too long, the system eventually plays back. Story 16. Not my case, but I watched it unfold like a courtroom soap opera because it involved an acquaintance going through a particularly nasty divorce. Classic setup. 2 people, 1 crumbling marriage, and shared ownership of a commercial property, worth a decent chunk of change, on paper at least. The property started slipping into financial quicksand. Delinquent payments, a possible lien, the whole mess. The husband kept trying to get his wife to talk about it. She ghosted him, dismissed him, and somewhere along the way started seeing someone else. So the divorce rolls in with the grace of a bulldozer. They start haggling over assets. The wife sets her sights on the house. Unencumbered, nice neighborhood, cozy equity. The husband? He says, sure, take the commercial property. Now here's where things get oddly satisfying. She pounced on the offer. The house was smaller potatoes, right? And she wanted a clean break. The part that makes this a chef's kiss moment, she never paid attention to the fact that the commercial building was financially upside down. And neither, for reasons still unknown to mankind, did her lawyer. No audit, no due diligence, no red flags raised. She walked away with a property drowning in debt, while he stayed in a paid-off home sipping coffee on the porch. Whether poetic justice or just bad lawyering, one thing's for sure. Ignoring financial red flags and skipping the fine print is a luxury that only looks affordable until the bills start arriving. Story 16. Not my case, but I watched it unfold like a courtroom soap opera because it involved an acquaintance going through a particularly nasty divorce. Classic setup. Two people, one crumbling marriage, and shared ownership of a commercial property, worth a decent chunk of change, on paper at least. The property started slipping into financial quicksand. Delinquent payments, a possible lien, the whole mess. The husband kept trying to get his wife to talk about it. She ghosted him, dismissed him, and somewhere along the way started seeing someone else. So the divorce rolls in with the grace of a bulldozer. They start haggling over assets. The wife sets her sights on the house. Unencumbered, nice neighborhood, cozy equity. The husband? He says, sure, take the commercial property. Now here's where things get oddly satisfying. She pounced on the offer. The house was smaller potatoes, right? And she wanted a clean break. The part that makes this a chef's kiss moment? She never paid attention to the fact that the commercial building was financially upside down. And neither, for reasons still unknown to mankind, did her lawyer. No audit, no due diligence, no red flags raised. She walked away with a property drowning in debt, while he stayed in a paid-off home sipping coffee on the porch. Story 17. I've been caught in an odd kind of ritual with British Gas. Every few years, they come at me with a court case, and every single time, I win. Then we both retreat to our corners and pretend it's over, until the next round. The last bout landed us in magistrate's court, despite it being a civil issue. This time, I had a solicitor who was clearly in no mood for bureaucracy. He let the British Gas representative get comfy, stand, and swear his oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Polite, proper, official. Then my solicitor asked a simple question. What do you know about the previous cases involving this dispute? The representative blinked. Nothing. Cue, silence. And then, like a polite hammer wrapped in silk, my solicitor calmly but surgically tore into the man. So you've just sworn to tell the whole truth, but you've come to court unaware of any prior proceedings? How, exactly, is that the whole truth? It went downhill for British Gas from there. The magistrates weren't impressed. The case was dismissed, and they awarded me £600 in costs. But the real highlight? The same guy who had walked in threatening forced entry and talking about police assistance ended the day being firmly told to sit down and speak only if spoken to. And just to sprinkle some irony on top, British Gas took 27 days to pay the £600. I was this close to sending in bailiffs. When the money finally arrived via bank transfer, I felt oddly let down. Because now I have to wait another few years for the sequel. Story 18. Had a criminal jury trial a few years back. Misdemeanor criminal mischief. Nothing earth-shattering until it was. The state had been fiddling with their charges like a student rewriting an essay at 3 a.m. They amended the case so many times that they accidentally dropped the actual victim from the trial. Instead, they built their case on the testimony of 2 eyewitnesses, my client's ex and the ex's brand new partner. A lovely duo of impartiality, obviously. They both claimed my client had vandalized a car, specifically the one belonging to the person now legally labeled not present. My client said he didn't do it. The jury looked skeptical. The prosecution looked confident. I looked amused. See, no one had checked a small detail. The ex, one of the star witnesses, had an outstanding warrant for unpaid child support owed to my client. So I asked the ex on the stand, as sweetly as I could, "Sir, "Are you aware that you have a warrant out for your arrest?" He wasn't. The moment landed like a dropped piano. The judge blinked. Jurors were escorted out. Bailiffs stepped in. The ex was arrested right there on the witness stand. I've seen legal dramas that couldn't have scripted it better. With their key witness in handcuffs and the actual victim nowhere in sight, the state rested their now very rickety case. We moved for a judgment of acquittal, and the judge granted it. Client walked, ex walked too, just in cuffs. Story 19. You'd think being married to a lawyer would prepare you for courtroom combat. Unfortunately for this guy, his ex-wife wasn't just a lawyer, she was a legal wrecking ball with a grudge, a motive, and zero breaks. She represented herself. He had a lawyer too, in the technical sense, someone with a law degree and a pulse, but not much else. Every few months, she'd drag him back to court for more alimony, more restrictions, more accusations. At one point, she claimed he was abusing their child, who, conveniently, was going through unmedicated manic episodes only when it was Dad's custody weekend. The reason? She secretly took him off his meds right before handing him over, just in time for chaos. The ex-wife's father, also a lawyer, finally stepped in and asked to meet with the judge. That was the first shift. Turns out, even he couldn't stomach what his daughter was doing. He told the judge everything: the manipulation of medication, the timing of abuse allegations just before holidays to maximize emotional damage, and even forged documents to inflate her ex's income. Oh, and for extra irony points, she was sleeping with her ex's lawyer the entire time. It explained a lot. The judge ordered a full review. The shameless lawyer boyfriend was reported to the bar, a new attorney was brought in, and for the first time in years, things began to look up. Custody was swinging in his favor. Alimony was about to be slashed. He finally had a shot at a life not orchestrated by courtrooms and forged pay stubs. And then came the second shift. He died, 2 months later. Blood clot. After years of drowning in legal warfare, he caught a glimpse of fresh air, only to get pulled under right before reaching the shore. Some endings write themselves. Others come with a signature in forged ink. Story 20. So there he was, an indigent defendant in custody, standing in court thinking today was his big break. His bond hearing was set. The DA and his public defender had already agreed on releasing him. All he had to do was nothing. Instead, he stood up and decided to sink his own ship. "I don't want a female lawyer," he declared. "I need a man who can take charge." The judge blinked slowly. She, too, was a woman. "That's not how this works," she replied, with the weariness of someone who's heard every dumb thing said in a courtroom, except maybe this one. He doubled down, complaining about his lawyer not visiting, not fighting for him, not being, presumably, man enough. The judge, now thoroughly over it, sighed and said, "Fine, I'll appoint new counsel. But since you decided to switch lawyers, we're not handling any other issues today. Case reset." First shift, he could have walked out that day on an unsecured bond. Instead, he chose to yell about estrogen levels and bought himself 6 extra weeks behind bars. Then came the second surprise. His new attorney? Also female, probably just as unimpressed. So there he sat, in jail, all because he didn't want a woman to represent him, and ended up with 2. The law moves in mysterious and occasionally petty. Story 21. I once saw a parent weaponize the absence of parenting to win custody of a teenager. Not affection, not responsibility, just the promise of 0 rules and an open tab for self-destruction. Why? To avoid paying roughly $100 a month in child support. Imagine telling a 15-year-old, "Sure, drop out of school. Weed? No problem. You want vodka with that blunt? Here's my wallet." All in the name of being the fun parent, because nothing says love like deliberately setting your kid on fire to save $100. First turn. The teen, of course, chose the path of least resistance. Who wouldn't when offered adult vices and 0 consequences in exchange for choosing where to live? Second turn, the other parent, trying to hold the line with curfews, school, and something resembling structure, gets painted as the villain because nothing ruins your credibility more than trying. And all this to save a monthly payment smaller than most phone bills. Family court may have a lot of gray areas, but this one, jet black.